Okay, welcome everybody. Today is August 13th, 2022. Welcome to my presentation. This is how I learned gray aliens plan to build a city on Earth. So this is the end of a big series of presentations, which I'm very grateful. I've been able to use Vancouver UFO to go into great detail about every single contact event I did. And that helped me. It's so invaluable when you're an experiencer, a contactee, and you can explore every single contact event in great detail. It helps you process it. And so I'm just eternally grateful. It was such a ride I've been on the entire time. And it started July 5th, 2020. And so it ends today, August 13th, 2022. In the process, I ended up making a book of my contact events. You can see my book there. It is available in the link to the meetup. And yeah, we'll just get this presentation started. So welcome. So today's presentation. So since my content has been out and I've kind of gone very public about it, I've received lots of questions. I've also seen people, some things weren't questions, but some things I've seen in the peripheral, people's interpretations of what they thought was going on. And I'm going to make a little presentation about what I think is going on, and it's going to be combined with questions that I've received. And so I'm kind of making a grand presentation about some of the ideas that are out there about what people think going on versus what I think is going on based off my experience. Then I'll just bust right into the contact events. Contact event number 24, Toronto, spring 2008. I was 30 years old. Contact event number 25, Vancouver, spring 2016, and I was 38 years old. Contact event number 26, Vancouver, June 14th, 2017. I knew the exact day, and I was 39 years old. There will be a Q&A, and that's because this section might be really large. And for those who want to stick around and who want to hear about this very fascinating past life awareness I have about a Roman general I've never gone public with, and it's a Roman general at the end of the Republic. And anyway, it's just a fascinating story, and I have the person's thoughts and emotions and feelings and perspective, and they were written in history. And so and I get a bunch of, I have a whole thing there, and it's very fascinating. And so then if people wanted to not stick around for that, there'll be a Q&A for the first half. And for those who want to hang out later, I'll also bust into a brief presentation on that past life awareness, and then go into a full kind of Q&A where we can hang out for the rest of the day. Okay. So yeah, I got lots of questions. And so I'm just going to kind of list questions that I got and kind of give answers to things. And maybe if anything, people, some other people have had these types of questions. And so this kind of answers larger picture content for people. So someone once said to me, can't we all have a white room experience? If there's some kind of problem going on here with, human evolution, and then the beings are trying to involve themselves, how come they just can't, give everyone a white room experience? And my answer to that is no, not everyone can have that room. What happened in my first chapter of my book, which is when I was 16 years old, I was put into a quote unquote dimensional room where I was turned into an orb, and it kind of produced this extreme consciousness event. And I was traumatized by it. So it needs to be clear that that what happens is that your brain contains emotions about your belief system and what you think is the nature of reality. And when you disturb that, what you do is you create a trauma that is inwardly focused. If you read my story, that is exactly what happened to me. I basically kind of had an inward thing that kind of rejected a part of itself, and it creates a trauma. So the human brain is very, very gentle and very sensitive, and you can't just be forcing, high spiritual experiences on brains that can't take it. So the brain has to get trained. It has to be a process of actual training the brain. And I do say here, I believe the enlightened mind, a person who practices, controlling the mind and releasing itself to the subconscious, but simultaneously trying to control the mind, is a practice with which someone could take the white room. So, right, it's a training of the brain that has to occur for someone to take on these extreme consciousness experiences. So that's my answer to that. Someone once said, if humans are using their consciousness computers, doesn't that mean they can control us? And my answer to that is no, because the part of the mind, the part of you're connecting to on their consciousness computers wasn't for me anyway, wasn't my mind. It was the being state. It was my, you could call it this consciousness that lives on. It's this part of your energy self. And that's what I was connecting to on the crafts, not something to do that was happening in the physical brain. Though I had technology, I did connect with technology that was connected to my brain. That was when I experienced the telekinesis and I experienced their craft. I was able to drive their crafts. So that was obviously linked to my brain, and I felt that. But so no, this is it's more like a merging as opposed to them being able to kind of control your consciousness. So that's my answer to that. Another thing I wanted to say here in this section of the presentation is that, I speak a lot about my personal experiences, and I need to make it crystal clear that I had 26 contact events, and I speak about a body of experience. The experience gives me confidence to talk about knowledge about what I've experienced. Then the beings said things to me, which I didn't experience. And I tried to make it crystal clear for you, the reader. I'll always be honest about this. This is the thing I didn't realize not everyone who is a contactee talks this way. And I want to make it crystal clear that this is how I communicate. I communicate by having a body of experience and being confident to talk about that body of experience. Then the beings said things to me, but I never experienced. Some cases they say things to me and I experience it. So then I have more understanding of that thing. But in some cases, they only talk about things and I don't experience it. And then I leave that back up to the listener or the reader to interpret. And I try to be honest about those two distinct things. The other thing I'm honest about too is learning about this stuff in front of you, the viewer, and you, the listener, and you, the reader, and you, the viewer of the presentation. So I'm always trying to be crystal clear about my content, where it comes from, in my own, how I interpreted and was able to give these answers to things. So I needed to say that one part there. So I heard this before, someone never said this to me, but I've heard someone say this: the beings are in control the entire time. That means it's nefarious. My answer to that is, but that's exactly how humans treat animals. So if we needed to do medical treatment on a bear or on some kind of animal, we don't let the animal wander into the medical space on its own. When it's in our environment, we control it. We have to, for its safety, actually, also, right? For its safety, we have to control it. So that piece is really important. And the point I need to make here too is that sometimes when I hear a point like this, I think people assume that the aliens are on our level. And my point you'll see here is that the aliens are actually on this, a level of comprehension we lack. So therefore, we have to be controlled in their environment. And that is the point I'm going to make, and I'll keep making that point here. I had someone say they don't agree with hybridization. And I said, humans might be alien hybrids anyway, right? That kind of answers itself. John Ramirez coming out with the CIA matches things that were said to me by the aliens, that human genetics is mixed in with different types of aliens possibly. And so hybridization might be a natural thing. Also, I have an article in which scientists are discovering that hybridization does happen naturally in nature. Two different species of bears can mate and have been known to mate, and different versions of horses and different versions of things. And there was always these theories that animals kept themselves separate, and now they're understanding that in nature animals may hybridize. Okay, so I had someone say this to me: we don't need gray alien help. Humans can do it on their own. So this part I need to talk about a bit. So, okay, climate, environment, it's very sensitive. People have a lot of opinions about it. But the stuff that I saw on an alien craft matches what the science is saying. Right? The UN climate change report, code red for humanity. Earth is firmly on track for an unlivable world. Scientists are terrified. Burning planet. In my 10th contact event in 1998, the beings just explicitly showed me the planet burning. And I thought that is really weird, because that seems to be the analogy about what actually is occurring is that heat is increasing. Heat is getting more intense. Wildfires are getting more extreme and burning more land. The UN says it's time to learn to live with fire. So it's very weird. But, you know, I want to make it clear that when we're talking about climate, that there is a huge push by corporations to confuse us about this information. And I always emphasize that people to go down the rabbit hole of where they're getting their information from and learn who is expressing that information and learn what different organizations are talking about what different things. And you will learn that there is actually a group called the Non-Governmental International Panel on Climate Change that explicitly tries to debunk it. And you'll see that is bankrolled by the Heartland Institute, which did the same thing with tobacco. So you have to go down these rabbit holes of climate. Now, here's the deal, is that climate change itself has a larger, it's affecting so much more than just the weather. So heat waves at both Earth's poles alarm climate science, right? So you have, and that's happening this summer as well too, where there's more heat than normal on the poles. Also, it's affecting the ocean currents, which are weakening your vertical collapse. That's how we had the water stream that happened last year. But also there's this other effect, which is the animals. The animals are being affected, and there is massive die-offs that are occurring as well too. Unprecedented species extinction, but also chemical pollution. Like there's all this effect that humans are having that is unprecedented. And we're having this effect on nature, and people almost, it doesn't matter if you deny one thing, you can't deny it all. That's the problem. You can't deny it all. Never can you deny how large we're getting with the population. 8 billion are at this year we're expected to reach. But here's the thing, right? It would take 5 Earths to support the human population if everyone's consumption patterns were similar to the average American. This is from the US Department of the Interior Bureau of Land Management. If there were fewer of us, we would have less impact, we would consume less, and more importantly, we would breed fewer consuming humans. And what's happening is everyone is moving into cities. So in the last 35 years, the urban population has grown by 2.3 billion people. And in that, you have an accumulation of, we have just passed the anthropogenic mass. So we have more concrete, asphalt, plastics, and metals than biology on the planet now. This just occurred within the last couple of years. We are an unprecedented what's occurring right now, right? And of course, all this, the carbon and all this kind of heat that we're producing comes from cities directly. And so it's not to say that humans can't individually fix these things. Of course, humans have the ability to solve any one of these single issues. But I think like you and me individually, when we are overwhelmed, we humans shut down, right? And I think that's what's going on here. I think all this information at some point or another has been put out into the media, and people kind of just don't want to see it, right? They don't know how to handle it. They don't know what to do about it. And literally, I think people kind of just freeze and just want to turn the other way. And I understand that personally as well too. And I think that's the shocker here, is that humans are kind of going over a cliff. And so to say that we can do it ourselves, I think the point is to say, okay, then you need to act now. And I think we don't know how to act. I think we just don't know what to do fully. We don't know how to do it. And I think this idea that maybe aliens may watch us overhead and stew in our own issues before they intervene, I'm not really clear what's going to happen there. But I think it could look like we could use, help on, if a species knows how to manage itself on a planet, we might need that information. So anyway, I argue that if humans can do it themselves, then we need to do it now. And if you look out the window, we're not changing too much. So that's what I say to that. So no one has ever said this to me. This is okay. Going back to answering questions, no one has ever said this to me, that I was deceived. No one's talked like that directly to me, but I've heard people say this about great aliens and aliens in general. I think actually Linda Moulton Howe, in one of her, Ian, the reason I brought you up also is because I actually subscribe to Earth Files now, the actual reports, and I saw it somewhere, and I can't remember where I saw it, but Linda was in an interview that Grant Cameron and Linda did together. Linda had mentioned that she was told in the 80s by military men, gray aliens lie. And it's like, don't trust them. Gray aliens lie. And I need to make it clear that, I don't want to believe in things that that are false. So I ironed out every aspect of my own story before I even published it to confirm, was I deceived somewhere here? And I can't see any deception. Though what the beings 100% did was not tell me things when I lacked comprehension about things. And they kind of were, they scuttled around it, or they tried to avoid the question, if you will. So, and I'll explain a bit, that I'm certain that this is what's going on with all of us, with every single contactee and government and everything, is lack of comprehension about what's going on here. So the aliens are bad. And of course, everyone's heard this one about gray aliens. The aliens are bad, darker deceivers, have no souls, are demons. Okay. So as someone with firsthand experience with the beings, it's hard not to comment when I hear people assume the beings have malevolent intentions. It should be noted that the research actually supports the beings are benevolent. Kathleen Martin has interviewed over 5,000 contactees and believes the beings to be benevolent. Mary Rodwell has interviewed over 3,000 contactees and believes the beings to be benevolent. Preston Denning has over 20 books on UFO and abduction research and believes the beings to be benevolent. Even Dr. David Jacobs' book, The Threat, doesn't actually have any contactees saying that they think the beings are a threat. He concludes that from his own personal opinion. All the contactees I have personally met and experienced the beings to be benevolent. Yes, doesn't mean that they aren't confusing, weird, strange, and can push you. But in the end, all the people I interacted with said, I think they were showing me something, and that there was more to it than just, haunting or terrifying people. Undeniable evidence of the being's benevolent nature are contact events in which they share technology. Grant Cameron says he knows 50 people who have driven crafts. Jim Sparks, Susie Hansen, myself, all have driven crafts. That is undeniable. That makes no sense for a malevolent intention species to be sharing their technology. Senator Harry Reid, of all the information that I have, which is quite a bit, I think there is no indication whatsoever that they are harmful. He's talking about whatever's operating the UFOs. Kind of scary, to be honest with you, but there is no indication of there being a reason to be afraid of them. But I think they're big time scary. Senator Harry Reid, for those who don't know, he was part of the funding of the UAP program that Lou Elizondo was a part of, now going around talking, but when it first initiated, he was one of the people who was in charge of funding it. So I think this is an issue of humans thinking we are intelligent enough to understand what they are doing and why they are doing it. But it looks like we are dealing with aliens that use quantum technology. Therefore, I lean towards an idea that we lack understanding about their frame of reference of reality. We assume they think like us, but if they are immersed in quantum, then it's likely they think in dimensions. And so when you think about, the analogy here is humans to Neanderthals. Imagine us going back to a Neanderthal. Now, you have 5 minutes with a Neanderthal. And basically, the Neanderthal is suffering. He thinks he's just food for the saber-toothed tiger. There's no point in living. This sucks. We're all just going to die anyway, and he has no hope. And you come back, you come from the future, and you say, no, man, you're going to make civilizations. You're going to make art. It's going to be this beautiful thing. Keep fighting. I'm trying to give you hope. You have 1 more minute left with the guy, and you say to him, okay, I'm going to go back home now. And he says, so you live in a cave also? And you got 1 minute. How do you explain to him you don't live in a cave, right? No, you live in a building with plaster walls that has heat, that has water, that has electricity. None of this stuff makes sense to him. So you actually might say, yeah, I live in a cave, right? You might try to skirt around his question to you. So you might actually just try to avoid, giving him extra detail. Why? Because it would just confuse him. It would be useless to him to say, oh, plaster. Do you know what plaster is? Okay, well, it's like kind of sand mixed together. Okay, now you get it. Now we have an infrastructure. Okay, now do you get the heat? Okay, heat, we have heat. And like, it makes no sense. He would be just kind of like stargazed, and you wouldn't know what to do with the information. So you don't say anything to him. And I think aliens do that with us. And I think they do that with humans a lot, actually. I think they try to give us information when we are the ones requiring information, and they're responding to us in that process. So then why do some people have bad experiences with the beings? Here's my take on people who have had bad experiences with the beings. I think the beings think we have a limited frame of reference of reality, and they like to break it. They like to play with people's minds. But they do seem to treat open minds differently than a mind that thinks it understands the nature of reality. So I'm going to give a bunch of examples of this stuff. George Knapp reported that military men with A-type personalities that came to Skinwalker Ranch had a paranormal entity follow them home. So it was in the Bob Bigelow days when Bob Bigelow owned Skinwalker Ranch, and then these military contract men would come, and the kind of more like aggressive types would get a paranormal entity that would follow them home to their house. The Commander Fravor story. Most people forget this stuff. They just focus on the fact that Commander Fravor, that Tic Tac, right? So the whole Tic Tac video that became famous, part of the 3 videos that the UAP task force released. But Commander Fravor's story has a specific element most people don't know what to do with. So after he's barreling, so he's in a jet, and there's 2 jets, and four pilots are watching this Tic Tac. They're burling around, and Commander Fravor decides to zero in on the actual UFO, turn and kind of counter it, and the thing either disappears or flies really fast. There seems to be no one's really clear either which one. But what ends up happening is that the object immediately flies to the cat point. The cat point is a rendezvous point in which the pilots were meant to go to before they were interacting with the UFO. So the question was, how did this UFO know the cat point? Now, again, what I see here is a species of aliens playing with the minds of the human, trying to say, how do you think I've learned that? Right. And apparently, Commander Fravor on Joe Rogan said the only person who had that information was the radar guy on the Princeton. When he radioed over, the aliens are this object is at the cat point. He's the only one who knew. So how the hell did this UFO get this information? And so you're always left with this kind of brain-breaking moment where you're kind of shocked with and trying to change up the nature of reality. In both of these come from the Unidentified Inside America's UFO Investigation, that TV show, and I really loved some stories that were in here. And this one's the Sean Cahill story. So basically, the same time when the Nimitz, USS Nimitz, was dealing with these UFOs on radar, you had this separate cruiser. So it's the USS Princeton, and so he describes it like this: Nimitz has something going on in the airspace. They were getting calls to go out on the bridge. They're basically saying, go out and see if you can see anything. They're not explaining what to see, but the guy says, go out, they're getting radar contacts. We need to see what it looks like. So this guy is the top security officer. So he goes out on the bridge with one of his men, and he says he looks at a 45-degree angle, and there was a constellation of lights, basically stars that were not normally there. So a whole constellation. And he said, as they were staring at it, they all changed positions, some were moving inwards towards the center, some were moving outwards, but all rotating. And as it rotated, some of the lights individually blipped off, and then they were all gone. So again, you have brain breaking with you think this is the nature of reality, and we're tripping up what you think is the nature of reality. And here's another point I need to make too: consciousness to consciousness, right? And also, the beings don't do this stuff with civilians. You never see this kind of stuff. You never see this extreme stuff with civilians. You always see it with military, these kind of more extreme ideas. You never hear about people talking like, oh, I see 12 objects in the sky and they kind of tripped up in the way they did this thing. They're very different in the way they interact with different people. So I am basically pointing out that they obviously treat open minds differently than a mind that thinks it understands the nature of reality. So an example of this reception and response to us and how we interpret what's going on, Linda Moulton Howe reports that the only country that doesn't have cattle mutilations is India, where they worship cows. So this is, basically I'm showing that who we think we are affects how the beings interact with us. And the point I make is that the behavior I see in aliens matches the behavior I see of other Earth high-level beings, such as Jesus, Krishna, Buddha, and gurus. So people think they understand high level beings because they're written in some book. But, you know, these personalities are complex. Jesus flipped the tables at the synagogue. Jesus cursed the fig tree. People think that high level beings are all, you know, when they talk, they have angels behind them and stuff. No. Krishna called Arjuna neuter gendered. He was offending him, telling him to get up and fight. Get up and fight. Right? He's breaking minds to break your brain, right? The Buddha used cones, right? My guru would do something that would shock people and or shock the person he's interactively dealing with, reading them and having the people kind of, oh, what? It would do something that would shock you. And this is Shiva here. This symbol is Shiva dancing on the baby, which is the symbol of ignorance. So this is Shiva, the god, dancing on top of the mind of the human, which is ignorance, dancing on the baby mind, dancing on the mind of ignorance, but dancing, get it? Playing with your brain, right? And that's the exact same behavior I see out of the aliens. High-level beings loving almost, getting enjoyment out of your frame of reference of reality. I'm going to bust that up a little bit and change what you think is the nature of reality. So that's what I see out of most of the stuff. But the other part of it too is that the aliens themselves are dimensional in nature. And so they force on people to approach your fears. And if you aren't comfortable approaching or conquering your own personal fears, then the aliens will push, you know, kind of a paranormal energy on you. And if you're not used to that energy, if you haven't experienced any type of idea of, you know, an expanded sense of consciousness, then this will terrify you. In one person I saw talking about their experience, they said there was an entity in the corner and it was the darkest and evilest entity it had ever seen. And I was like, you think you know, like you might be projecting, right? Like you might be projecting, this thing might be touching a part of you that you haven't explored yet. That's why ghosts are scary, right? Ghosts scare people, not because it's a person who's invisible in your room, but because it's making you force yourself about a part of yourself that you haven't looked at, which is an expanded sense of consciousness. If you don't look at it, then you just project your own fear back onto it. And the aliens do the exact same thing to people. So why do some people have bad experiences? I think the beings understand that post-traumatic growth is good for a human as a method of breaking their frame of reference of reality, breaking out of their mind. You'll see today, I'll give examples of this. In my 3 contact events, the beings did exactly this with me. Post-traumatic growth refers to positive psychology change resulting from a struggle with traumatic or highly challenging life circumstances. Experiencing a traumatic event can have a transformational role in personality among certain individuals and facilitate growth. I think this is what's going on with the beings. They're always breaking minds, throwing you out of your own frame of reference of reality. Okay, so we're getting to the end of this section here, but I've also heard people say this too. So when someone prays to Jesus, and the beings leave, that proves they're demons. And so what I say to this is, I mentioned this in my last video, in which when will humans gain the consciousness abilities of gray aliens? I talk about what happens when we are worshiping an external, you know, deity, Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, gurus. What we're doing is when we get close to them, we embody the higher self. So when you're worshiping, you're praying, and you're feeling that God is close to you, you're actually bringing in your own higher self. And when you bring in your own higher self, that's what the beings are responding to. That is exactly what CE5 does. Stephen Greer has you feeling unity, feeling connection. You're therefore bringing in your own higher self. The beings respond on this level of the higher self. This is what happened in my own contact events. This is why CE5 works. This is why when you're saying, I don't want this anymore, and you pray, you're using your higher self to do it, then the beings actually literally respond to that. So here's Jacques Vallée. The UFO phenomenon represents evidence for other dimensions that simply cannot be understood apart from their psychic and symbolic reality. What we see here is not an alien invasion. It is a spiritual system that acts on humans and uses humans. So ultimately, the thing that I say from after all my research and experience, especially with my book and everything I've seen, listen, I sold myself coming out in public as a guy who was not in this field. I was not in this field, and then it kind of like delved into it from the outside going in. And I figured out that nobody understands what this is. Don't believe that some government guy understands it, because I'm not convinced of that anymore. I don't think anybody understands what it is. And what I mean by that is, we may have the modalities now. In the 50s, 100 years ago, humans did not have the modalities to understand it. And I think the beings are partially responsible for bringing those modalities to us to understand it. So on paper, we now understand quantum reality. On paper, we can understand these high-level consciousness experiences, but no one's living it. No, and when the same thing with the Neanderthal. You can finally tell the Neanderthal what's going on with the house. You can explain to him the house, but he's not cooking on the stove. He doesn't use the fridge. He still isn't living it. So he therefore is still lacking comprehension. He doesn't have to pay rent. He doesn't even gone to that level about what it means to even own a house. And so you have this whole other reality when you actually start living things. And this is what's going on. I'm totally certain of it, that we're dealing with lack of comprehension about other dimensionality, and no one on the planet is living it. And though we are understanding, we're finally getting the modalities to understand this stuff. So I wanted to use the movie Contact. I don't know if people remember Contact with Jodie Foster. Yeah. So the movie Contact, I think, is the best explanation for all alien contact going on here with us. When people remember this movie, it was a beautiful movie where an alien was basically giving messages to humans. And the result is, when Jodie Foster finally goes visit the alien in their dimension, it turns into her dad. And she at first thinks it's her dad. This is, sorry, there's lack of volume here.
I missed you.
So the alien allows Jodie Foster character to believe it's the dad, and then gives Jodie Foster's character a moment to figure out with her own comprehension what's really going on here. It's not her dad. It's an alien, right?
None of this is real.
That's my scientist.
So this analogy, I think, is the best analogy for all stuff going on with the aliens, that we're dealing with interdimensionality and incomprehensibility. And the beings are dimensional by nature, which is confusing to humans, and how they express themselves ends up being confusing to humans. So you can watch that little clip. I thought that was a really good example of this part here. So just the point that I want to make about some questions about, for me, how large this goes and why this is so much more bigger than humans are willing to understand. Just some questions that I don't even think people have ever asked, right? Do you think this is the first time gray aliens have hid in the background of a society? Right? This is massive. Right? Because they're very skilled at what they're doing. If they're sitting in the background, they've been here the entire time, and they're slowly evolving, and they're slowly abducting, and they're slowly impacting people, then this is unprecedented, and they're obviously very skilled at it. So, where did they get these skills? You could almost ask. So there's just, I keep pointing out that this is massive. It is huge to the brain of the individual human. And I'm convinced no person really has the full picture, and that the beings themselves are slowly giving us the pieces so we can comprehend it, right? Here's another one. If aliens have been involved in the genetic manipulation of the human species and introduced other alien DNA throughout human biological history, then whose planet are we on? Are we ready to even have these questions? Are we ready to have the answers to these questions, right? So I'm going to make a kind of a crazy statement, if none of this is already sounding crazy, but I personally don't believe in disclosure. I believe if people want the information, they should get it. But I don't think the average human being, I don't think this helps the average human being. I don't. Every time I tell people I have a book and people get inquired about it and we talk about aliens, there's always something that disturbs people. It doesn't matter what it is. There's always a level that will disturb them. And I don't think that that's really that helpful if they're not looking to have that part of their brains opened up. And I think this is the challenge that maybe, people in positions of power are aware of, that this is just too big. It's too massive. It's too large for the human brain. And so again, I do believe in disclosure. If you yourself say, no, I can take it. I want to know the truth. I need to learn it. I need to. And you kind of go down that road and you should get all that information. I do believe that. But I also believe that it's not helping people. It won't help them. And my parents, like I was trying to figure out if my parents should have this information. And I don't think that they understand how deep this goes and how far it goes. And I'm not really clear that that's helpful to them. And so, yeah, that's my 2 cents. I want to give that because this was the end. And I actually had other things to say, but we'll cut it short. Actually, one of the things I wanted to do, it's too big. I'll just talk about it here. Linda Moulton Howe, actually on her Earth Files YouTube channel, okay, June 15th, 2022. So in this video, I had a corroboration where she's sitting here describing the Trantiloid species, which is technically the mantid species, has timeline technology. Now, of course, my whole story is that from day one, at my first contact event, they show me my timeline. And of course, you just sound insane, right? You sound insane writing about it, talking about it, and yet I had no explanation for it. Well, here you go. I finally have a corroboration that actually matches my experience. And I actually thought that this description Linda gave about this interaction with these species was the closest thing I think we have to the picture of what's going on here. And that she does explain things that kind of are similar to my experiences, but it was missing elements. And it's worth pointing that out, that this military whistleblower gave Linda Moulton Howe some type of information about the different species, and some of it adds up, but not all of it adds up. So like, humanoids are seen interacting with gray aliens, and I'm not the only one who's had that experience. There's several people here in BC alone who've had gray aliens and humanoids. So there's something, and then this military whistleblower kind of said that there's the segmentation, but that doesn't add up. That's not the picture that shows. And also the other thing that she mentioned that matches up my experience as what I thought is that the aliens are actually very standoffish to humans, that they aren't interacting and coming down and interacting with governments. This is not what I believed. And she's kind of emphasizing that government contacts emphasize that they don't get information from these from certain species of aliens. And that was always my feeling, and that's because I believe it's dimensionality, and you're dealing with military men and Pentagon officials, and then the beings know that they can't provide that information to them. So it was a very awesome presentation. I thought actually had the best picture I've seen so far about what I think is going on here, but it was lacking a larger piece of the puzzle. And I think that speaks to the military trying to interpret what they're looking at when you don't have any of the dimensionality associated with this phenomenon. Okay, so